Working on the 6.9 diesel, and what I'm doing right now is trying to assess whether or not I need to send this out for balancing. So the first step in that is I want to check the factory balance on the rods and the pistons. I want to see how much they vary, if at all. Because I've heard that the factory balance on these engines was fairly atrocious. So if I see the rods and pistons are all over the place, then I'm just going to send it out and have it balanced. So far the rods don't seem too bad. I'm just checking total weight. I'm not going to check them end to end just yet. So I had one rod that was a few ounces heavier than the rest, 1252. Not too bad. So the lowest was 1247, highest was 1252. That's only 5 grams. I can almost live with that. But I might go end to end on that one rod and try and make it match the rest of them. That's not hard to do. Moving on to the pistons. I'm checking the weight with the rings and with the pin and with the pin keepers. So one of the disadvantages of working on V8s, or any V8 engine for that matter, is they have to be dynamically balanced. One of the reasons I like inline 4s is because they don't. You can static balance an inline 4, just to make sure all the rods and pistons weigh the same. Make sure the rods weigh the same end to end and total weight, and bolt it together. As long as your crankshaft is neutral balanced and the flywheel or flex plate is neutral balanced, and whenever you bolt to the front of the crankshaft is neutral, you're good to go. V8s have to be dynamically balanced. And I don't have a dynamic. This one wants to change its mind. Oh, there's carbon on the piston. We'll leave it there. So the pistons are a little better. My lowest is 1143. My highest is 1147. So 4 grams, about the same, 4 to 5 grams. Once again, I can almost live with that. Now I'll check the weight of the new pistons. These are 40 over pistons. In order to do that, I need the piston, I need a pin, I need the retainers, and I need a ring pack. So you would expect the new pistons to be a little heavier because they're a little bigger. And that seems to be holding true. These pistons were Federal Mogul pistons, but when you look at the actual casting, it says Molly in them. So Molly seems to be the go-to piston for these IDIs. They do vary a bit in weight though, which is surprising. Ruh-roh. Better re-zero that. Okay. I'm going to go back and check that piston I just did. Yep, that did change. And I'm going to check number 2 too. You really only need a scale with a resolution of 1 gram. Such scales are fairly inexpensive. I think I paid about 60 bucks for this one quite a few years ago. And that came down 1 gram. All right, 2 to go. And last one. Okay, so I see a variance of 1153 for the, oh, I'm sorry, 1152 for the lightest one, and 1156 for the heaviest one. That's only 3 grams difference. So you can tweak that, and you can see right here they give you a little bit of an extra casting here. I can grind that off on the heavy pistons to try and make them weight match to the light ones. I should be able to equalize those since I'm only dealing with a 3 gram difference. It's not always the case. I ordered a set of Keith Black KB pistons one time, and there was, I think, 5 grams difference on one piston that was heavy. And it took quite a bit of judicious whittling on that piston to get it to match the others. And you have to be careful because you don't want to weaken the pin boss at all, and you can't get into the skirts. So you can take it off the inside here, which reduces the thickness of the dome a little bit, or any of these little casting bosses that you see, casting flash, that sort of thing, to try and lighten it. But aluminum is kind of a light metal to start with, so it can be difficult. The last set of pistons that I ordered were Speed Pros, and it was for a 5 liter, and those pistons were all exactly the same weight. So actually, no, I take that back. They varied by 1 gram. And since it was only 1 gram, I just weight matched all my rods, and I matched up heavy pistons with light rods. The rods varied about the same amount, one gram or so, and the engine came out pretty smooth. So these 40 over pistons are about 10 grams, maybe 9 grams heavier than the standard bore pistons that I took out, which that's not unusual. It's a bigger piston. It's a 40 over piston, so that kind of makes sense. So in order to balance this, static balance it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to weight match all of the connecting rods end to end. So I'm going to try and make all the small ends weigh the same. I'm going to try and make all the big ends weigh the same. And in the process of doing that, I'll have to see if I can remove a little bit of weight. I'm going to try and pull that extra weight of the 40 over piston off the connecting rod if I can. And the formula for bob weight when balancing crankshafts for V8 engines is 50% of reciprocating weight, which would be the small end of the connecting rod, and everything that's attached to it. So the piston, the pin, the keepers, and all the rings. So you add all that up, you take 50% of that or divide by 2, and then you measure the big end of the connecting rod, and you add the weight of the big end of the connecting rod with its bearing to half of what the reciprocating weight is, and that gives you the bob weight spec for the crank. So in my case, that's useful because I can either pull about 9 grams off the small end of the connecting rod, or I can pull about 4.5 grams off the big end, because that will work in the formula to collect and calculate bob weight. So 9 grams off the big end, 4.5 grams off the small end, and the weight, the total bob weight will stay the same compared to what I just took out of this engine and what I'm putting back in, so it shouldn't shake. So these rods vary a little bit. I'll have to spend some time weight matching them. I got a fixture that you can set up to hold one end of the rod while you're measuring the weight of the other end, and then flip it over and do the same thing for the small end. That's a time-consuming thing to do, and I'm not looking forward to it, but it needs to be done. And really, it goes a long way to making a V engine smooth if you just make sure that all of your rod weights and your piston weights are all the same. So connecting rod weight, total weight needs to be exactly the same on all the rods. And then the big ends have to match, the small ends have to match, all the piston weights have to match. If you do that without sending it out, you'll improve the balance of it. If I would have seen a 10-gram variance in the rods and a 30-gram variance in the pistons, I probably would have sent this thing out and had it balanced. And that's kind of a big deal with any engine that has a imbalance in the flywheel and the balancer, because you have to send the crankshaft, all the rods, the pistons. Well, no, you don't. You have to send, if you weight match, you have to send one rod, you have to send one piston and all the ancillaries to the machine shop. They can weigh that one. If all the other ones weigh the same, then they don't need them. But you need the crankshaft, you need the flywheel, and you need the balancer. And all that stuff has to be bolted together and put on the balancing machine, because there's weights in the flywheel and there's weights in the balancer. So this engine, balancing information for this engine is like pulling teeth. These IDIs, very difficult to find out what the imbalance of the flywheel is. And I've heard some people say that they're neutral balanced. They are not. There's a cutout in the factory flywheel that imbalances it. So if you look at the flywheel, the way it's oriented on the crankshaft, it's supplementing the last two counterweights on the crank. So for cylinders number 7 and 8, the flywheel is adding a bit of weight to help balance the crankshaft. Same thing in the front of the engine. The harmonic balancer has a wide web in it that is right directly in line with the front two counterweights on the crankshaft. So the cylinder number 1, cylinder number 2 counterweights are being supplemented by what's hanging off the front of the crank on the balancer. So there's definitely an imbalance spec for both the balancer and the flywheel. And there's also a possible difference between the flywheel and balancer spec between a 6.9 and a 7.3 IDI. I can't find out where that information is. I've looked everywhere. If you go to aftermarket parts catalogs, it will show the same part number for a 6.9 in 87 and a 7.3 in 88. But if you look at Ford part numbers, they're different. So I still have yet to determine whether it's a difference in the balance specification for the flywheel between a 6.9 and a 7.3. That's one of the reasons I put this engine on a run stand. I wanted to run it before I took it apart just to make sure it was smooth, and it was. And now that I know that it's smooth with the factory components, once I put it back together with an aftermarket flywheel for 7.3, because I'm using a ZF and I need that big clutch, then if it shakes, I know that the problem has to lie in the flywheel. And at that point, I'll have to take the 7.3 flywheel that I just purchased, the 6.9 flywheel that come off of it. I'll have to cart both of those off to the machine shop and have the machinist balance the 7.3 flywheel to match the 6.9 specification. So that can be handled as a separate issue. I'm not too worried about that. But yeah, so I got a little work to do. I'm going to have to trim the weight, the reciprocating weight a little bit. And I can do that by actually taking weight off the rotating weight of the rod and try and get them a little bit closer to what I took out of this engine and make sure they're all the same. And that's just kind of what you have to do with balancing. In this case, I'm not going to send it out because I know that I can duplicate what was in this engine before I tore it down. And I know that it wasn't shaking then, so it shouldn't shake when I'm done. So kind of the tricks of the trade. You do need a tool like this, a gram scale, so you can weigh everything. And you have to either buy or build a fixture to measure your connecting rods. I built one out of some bar stock, and it seems to work pretty well. It's tough. It's difficult to measure end to end on connecting rods. The way that you can check yourself is when you measure the small end and the big end, add them together. If you did it properly, what you add together should equal the total weight of the connecting rod. If it doesn't, you have to do it again. So anyway, some tips and tricks on this IDI. I'm hoping to get this thing together in the next couple of months, and thanks for watching.